Works now, Edward. Come along. Goodbye, Skarloey. Your railway's a lovely line. Oh, it is, it is. You've cheered me up, Edward. Goodbye.
Skarloey is a fictional narrow-gauge saddle tank locomotive created by the Reverend W. Awdry. He's one of the oldest engines on the island of Sodor, and coincidentally is the #1 engine on the Skarloey Railway. He would first appear in the Railway series book Four Little Engines, which was published in 1955, and his last appearance in the Railway series was in New Little Engine, published in 1996. Skarloey is based on the Tallyclin, yeah that's right, I learned how to say it, Railway #1 locomotive Tallyclin, and several historical events that would occur with Tallyclin in real life were mirrored with his fictional counterpart, Skarloey. This same locomotive was also used to represent Skarloey in real life. In the books, Tallyclin is also mentioned as being Skarloey's twin. In the television series, however, it wouldn't be until 1995 when Skarloey would be introduced into the 4th season. This season placed a great focus on him and the other narrow-gauge characters, with a number of the stories from the original Railway series books being adapted for the television series. Out of all of the narrow-gauge engines on the Skarloey Railway, Skarloey is the only one to keep his original Railway series livery, albeit with different shades and different colored lining as the series would progress. In the classic series of Thomas and Friends, Skarloey is portrayed as an old and wise engine. However, as the series went on, Skarloey's character would gradually become altered to that of a more young personality under the influence of hit entertainment. In 2004, the narrow-gauge engines would take a full absence, but return the following year. In 2009, when the show would transition into full CGI, the narrow-gauge engines were absent for 3 years. Skarloey would later return in the 2012 special, Blue Mountain Mystery, along with Rheneas, Sir Handel, Peter Sam, and Rusty. I'm also happy to say that in the CGI series, his classic personality returned. The Reverend did have a model of Skarloey that he built at an 009 scale. The model was made from a Dolgok kit with a Pecco James saddle tank and a new cab, and I apologize if I mispronounced Tolgok there. The Reverend's original Skarloey model is now on display at the Narrowgauge Museum in Wales, located near the Tallyclin Railway along with the other Skarloey Railway engines and rolling stock. The television series would see several different Skarloey models. The first one, being the O-gauge model in small scale, was custom built from brass by model maker Peter Eves. The models would run on O-gauge track as to properly scale them with the Gauge 1 models. It was painted using glossy car body paint, lined with white and gold pinstripe taping, and the numbers and nameplates were custom printed foil stickers. Skarloey's wheels were sourced from 10 spokes tramway wheels made by Slater's Plasticard, and these wheels were used on an O-gauge locomotive chassis. All of the side rods seen on the narrow-gauge steam engines were sourced from old OO-gauge trying models and modified slightly to fit. The rods did not fit well at all, and the engines notoriously ran horribly behind the scenes. His buffers were sourced from Slater's Plasticard as well, with most engines using square-based short-sprung buffers. 10 different facial expressions would be sculpted for the small model, and all 10 would be used on screen. The faces were first sculpted in clay, and from that, resin casts were made using a silicone mold. Skarloey's laughing face is now owned by Twitter user Thomas Tankmerch. The model would have a motor to power it mounted inside of the chassis, as well as an eye mechanism. Because of this, however, there was no room to fit a smoke mechanism or the battery and receiver needed for the RCIs. Wires connecting the battery, servo, and receiver were usually hidden off camera, or carried in rolling stock behind the locomotive. Although the models didn't produce smoke was released from the set under them, this creating the illusion as if they did for a brief moment. Nearly all drivers and firemen for the small-scale locomotives were cut down the middle and black tacked to the engine's cab. Due to the servos and eye mechanism being so large, it wouldn't allow them to stand half in the cab. That and most of their cabs were built sectioned off. The small-scale Skarloey model was honestly predominantly used in the 4th season. It was used in the 5th season for in-between shots where they would interact with the Gauge 1 scaled characters, and later in season 7 in stock footage, but wouldn't be actually used again until the 10th season, in Thomas and Skarloey's Big Day Out, where Skarloey's small-scale model was used again for the first time in over 5 seasons. The small-scale model was used in the long shots alongside Thomas's Gauge 1 model. Throughout the years, Skarloey would slightly be modified and refurbished to resemble that of his large-scale model, like the brass ring around his funnel being painted black, his model becoming significantly more weathered, and his cab becoming opened up instead of blacked out. He would also have a tail lamp added. He would also, at some point after the 10th season, receive a new whistle, resembling that of the one used on the large-scale model. In August of 2020, Skarloey's small-scale model, along with his name board, which was supplied by Twitter user Tom's Props, is now known to be owned and preserved by Twitter user Thomas Tankmerch. Skarloey had another O-gauge model, this one being in a large scale, and this was made for ease of filming and reliability. The 5th season would introduce these large-scale models, and from the 6th to 12th season, these models were used almost exclusively. They were built to a larger scale than the Gauge 1 engines, and ran on O-gauge track. They were close to 16mm scale, but slightly larger. For this model, 13 different facial expressions will be sculpted, although only 12 would ever be seen on screen. A clinched/sleeping face will be left unused. And just like the last, these faces were sculpted in clay, and from that resin casts were made of a silicone mold. The model was made from brass, with the wheel and chassis being CNC, meaning custom machined. The model would actually be track powered, so pickup contacts were attached to the metal wheels. This would then run the power to the motor. These engines' eye mechanisms also closely resembled that of the Gauge 1 models, with each one having 2 servos, one for up and down movement and one for left and right movement, all being attached in the same way that the others were, with the eyeballs being coupled into brackets and locked in place by the faceplate. I should note that 2 models of Skarloey were made to this scale, a weathered model and a very clean model. The clean model was built for the 11th season episode Wash Behind Your Buffers, as the original large-scale Skarloey model was weathered so much over the years that cleaning it shiny was basically impossible, so they built a new model. They would also build a dented saddle tank and cab for the 10th season episode Wharf in Peace, when several logs would tumble down a slope, hitting and denting his saddle tank. Like I said earlier, in the 5th season episode Duncan Gets Spooked, Rusty's ghost engine was made using Skarloey's model. According to Models on TV, an online magazine, the model used was specially modified. It could only travel a certain distance before a motor swung it off the bridge. In a following scene, the model was also covered in white powder to represent it being a ghost. In the 9th season episode Tuneful Toots and the 12th season episode The Man in the Hills, Skarloey is seen with a lamp. This, like the others, was powered by a hidden battery pack inside of his body. Skarloey's large-scale model would undergo many modifications throughout the television series. For example, in Season 5, the cab handrails present on his previous model disappeared, and the large-scale model had his buffers changed from gray to silver. His whistle would also change sound. In Season 6, his paint would be given a matte finish, and the brass ring around his funnel would be painted black, with his model becoming significantly less weathered. In Season 9, a tail lamp was added, with his whistle being changed back to how it was in the 4th season, and in Season 12, his pupils became bigger. I also would like to note that throughout the hit era, Skarloey and Rheneas were often seen mistakenly wearing each other's face masks, which looking at now is kinda funny. Skarloey did have a close-up model built, this being required for when he had to interact with the close-up scale figures, and what's cool about Skarloey's model is his funnel and firebox would emit smoke when required. The cab would be made in pieces, so it was easy to be dismantled and reassembled for interior shots. Unfortunately, Skarloey's close-up model, like others, did not have a face, seeing as most of the time the models were not complete. On top of that, the faces would likely never be seen in this scale. Unlike his O-gauge models, Skarloey's front and back cutout windows had glass and gold porthole rings, and this model would appear in Season 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, and 12. In 2009, the series would switch to CGI, as most of you all know, and photographs of Skarloey's large-scale model would be used for referencing. In addition, Nitrogen Studios would actually go to the Tallyclin Railway and take measurements of Skarloey's basis, Tallyclin. They wanted the CGI model to resemble Tallyclin as close as possible. And surprisingly, for once in my life, I have to say I appreciate what the CGI did with Skarloey, much more than what Hit Entertainment did with him. It's not a stretch to call Skarloey a fan-favorite character, and it's understandable as to why. There's so much behind the character of Skarloey. Whether it's his real-life basis or the situations that the show would throw at him, there's always just been so much to appreciate. And hopefully this video has given you a little bit more to appreciate in terms of Skarloey. I can't say he's my favorite narrow gauge character, but nonetheless, I do appreciate the character. And now knowing even more about him, at least for me, just makes it that much better. I don't know if it's just me, but I will never forgive Hit Entertainment for what they did to our boy. That is just no.